This is the movie on development. So, development is the gradual modification of anatomical structures and physiological characteristics during the period from fertilization to maturity. Embryological development, we can see here, occurs during the first 2 months after fertilization. Fetal development begins at the start of week 9, and that continues until birth. The time spent in prenatal development is known as gestation, and gestation is divided into 3 trimesters. In the first trimester, embryological development takes place and the framework for all the major organ systems appear. In the second trimester, the organs and the organ systems continue to develop, and the third trimester is when the largest gain in fetal weight occurs and the organ systems become fully functional. So we're going to look at the details of development. So it all starts with fertilization. The ovulated secondary oocyte is suspended in meiosis II, and as you can see from this figure, it takes hundreds of sperm to penetrate the corona radiata and the zona pellucida. A single sperm is going to fuse with the oocyte membrane, triggering oocyte activation and the completion of meiosis II. This causes the male and female pronuclei to form, and these spindle fibers start to form. Then the pronuclei fuse in a process called amphimixis, and the cell now has the normal chromosome number, which is 46 or 23 pairs. Then cytokinesis will produce 2 daughter cells, each half the size of the original zygote, and these cells are called blastomeres. After 3 or 4 days, this developing embryo is now called a morula. It's a solid ball of cells, and the morula typically reaches the uterus around day 4. We can see fertilization usually happens here in the uterine tubes, and then it takes about 3 or 4 days for it to get into the uterus. Once inside the uterus, glycogen secretions from the uterus cause the morula to rearrange into a hollow ball called a blastocyst. So here's the blastocyst, here's a cross section through it. The cavity is called the blastocyst. The outer layer of the blastocyst is called the trophoblast. It is responsible for providing nutrients to the developing embryo and will form the placenta. The inside of the blastocyst is called the inner cell mass, which will become the fetus. Around day 7, the blastocyst touches the endometrium wall and implantation begins. The blastocyst erodes the endometrial lining and becomes enclosed within the endometrium. The trophoblast cells at the point of contact divide rapidly, making the trophoblast several layers thick. The cells closest to the blastocell remain intact, forming what's called the cellular trophoblast. Near the endometrial wall, the plasma membrane separating the trophoblast cells disappears, creating what's called the syncytial trophoblast. So this is several cells have merged together to form this. The syncytial trophoblast continues to grow and it breaks down the uterine glands. This releases nutrients that are sent to the inner cell mass by diffusion, and these nutrients support the early stages of embryo formation. So after the embryo becomes implanted in the endometrial wall, around day 12 gastrulation starts, and gastrulation produces 3 different germ layers. This table tells everything that comes from the 3 germ layers. The ectoderm is going to become the skin and nervous system. The mesoderm becomes the muscles, bones, and blood. And the endoderm forms the digestive and respiratory systems. Shows us the extraembryonic membranes that are forming. They're going to form the placenta, which is going to support fetal growth and development. In yellow, we can see the yolk sac. This forms as endodermal and mesodermal cells spread out around the edge of the blastocell. This is visible 10 days after fertilization and is the first definite sign of fertilization that you can see, or definite sign of pregnancy that you can see on an ultrasound. The amnion forms as ectodermal and mesodermal cells migrate around the cavity that separates the inner cell mass from the trophoblast. This is going to become the amniotic sac. We can see here the amniotic sac, which fills with amniotic fluid, which surrounds and protects the developing fetus. The allantois forms from endoderm and mesodermal cells and will form the urinary bladder. And the chorion forms from mesodermal cells and trophoblast cells, and it will become the placenta. Now we're going to go back to looking at the embryo. At week 2, the embryo is very simple, and the extraembryonic membranes are starting to form. At week 3, the embryonic disc bulges into the amniotic cavity at the head fold right here. By week 4, the embryo now has a tail fold as well, and the body stalk and the yolk stalk form. By week 5, the developing embryo bulges into the uterine cavity, and the body stalk and the yolk stalk fuse to form the umbilical stalk. By week 10, the amnion fills the uterine cavity and the umbilical cord is formed. The placenta supplies nutrients to and removes waste from the fetal circulation. So that's how the baby gets its nutrients and is connected by the umbilical cord. The placenta also produces important hormones. First is human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG. This maintains the corpus luteum and keeps the endometrial lining functional. It is released in the urine and is a good indicator of pregnancy. Next is human placental lactogen, HPL. This prepares the mammary glands for milk production. Relaxin increases the flexibility of the pubic symphysis. It causes dilation of the cervix and delays labor contractions. After the first trimester, the placenta produces enough progesterone to maintain the endometrial lining. And towards the end of the 3rd trimester, estrogen production increases, stimulating labor and delivery. So now we're going to look at some of the developmental landmarks. The organ systems are established in the 1st trimester, and they become functional in the 2nd and 3rd trimesters. By week 2, we can see here the central nervous system is starting to form. By week 4, the heart is beating. By week 6, the placenta has formed. And at the end of the 1st trimester, the fetus looks human and the muscles are forming. So that's by 9 weeks, it pretty much looks like a human. After the 4th month, the face is formed, the cerebral hemispheres are enlarging, hair growth begins, peripheral nerves have formed, sensory receptors are developing, and the fetus moves frequently. So next we're going to talk about pregnancy. Pregnancy places anatomical and physiological stresses on the mother. Even even though she looks happy right now. The mother gains about 25 pounds that is not aligned with the body axis, so that can cause problems with balancing. Sometimes they have to waddle. And the reason for this is because on the left we have a non-pregnant female, and we see where all her organs are. And on the right we have a pregnant female, and we can see all the organs get squished out of their places. Because the uterus normally is this small, but as it grows it just pushes everything else up. So let's look at some of the physiological changes in a pregnant woman. The respiratory rate and the tidal volume are going to increase because the mother needs to get oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide, not only for herself but also for the developing baby. Blood volume increases to meet the needs of the fetus. There are several hormones that cause the mammary glands to develop. In the kidneys, the GFR is going to increase about 50% to remove waste produced by the fetus. The volume of urine produced increases, and pregnant women need to urinate frequently. Not only is the amount of urine they produce increasing, but the bladder or the uterus is squishing their bladder. Pregnant women need to eat about 30% more nutrients to feed the fetus. And the uterus grows from, in a non-pregnant woman, it's about 3 inches and weighs 1 ounce. And in a full-term woman, it's about 12 inches and 2.4 pounds. Alright, next we're going to talk about labor. Several factors initiate and accelerate the process of labor. The mother's sick of the baby being in there, and the baby's probably sick of being in there as well. But this is how it works. Placental estrogens, so there's placental factors and fetal factors. The placental factors are from the mother, the fetal factors are from the fetus. So the placental estrogens are going to increase the sensitivity of the smooth muscle cells of the myometrium. They're also going to cause maternal oxytocin release and prostaglandin production. These prostaglandins are powerful smooth muscle stimulants, and if you remember, the wall of the uterus is a thick layer of smooth muscle. The relaxin produced by the placenta relaxes the pelvic joints and dilates the cervix, leading to stretch of the myometrium. And as we stretch the myometrium, that produces more prostaglandins. Growth and increase in fetal weight also stretches the myometrium, and stretch or distortion of the myometrium causes prostaglandin production. And the fetus is also going to release oxytocin in response to estrogens. The oxytocin and the prostaglandins cause the myometrium to contract. And as the head moves into the cervix, this further stretches the myometrium. And that's going to make more prostaglandins and cause more contraction of the myometrium, and it produces this positive feedback cycle. So let's look at the stages of labor. First we have the dilation stage. The dilation stage begins with the onset of true labor as the cervix dilates and the fetus moves into the cervical canal. Contractions usually last half a minute and can occur once every 10 to 30 minutes. Then the expulsion stage begins as the cervix completes dilation and continues until the fetus has emerged from the vagina. Contractions are at maximum intensity and occur at 2 or 3 minute intervals lasting a full minute. And then finally the placental stage is when the placenta or afterbirth is ejected. After delivery, the newborn is dependent on the mother for nourishment and protection. Milk is provided through the milk letdown reflex. Mammary gland secretion is triggered when the infant sucks on the nipple. That stimulates tactile receptors. And then these signals are sent to the spinal cord and then to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamic neurons are going to release oxytocin at the posterior pituitary. And then that oxytocin, when it reaches the mammary glands, it causes contraction in the walls of the lactiferous ducts and sinuses and milk ejection. Postnatal development, so postnatal is after birth. Postnatal development includes 5 life stages. The neonatal period and infancy, where the newborn is dependent on nutrients contained in milk. In early childhood, the child is weaned from milk and they grow. Adolescence begins at puberty, the period of sexual maturation, and ends when growth is completed and we reach maturity. At puberty, the male and female sex hormones have an effect on many body systems. So the whole cause of puberty is in the hypothalamus. GnRH is the levels increase greatly, which causes that goes to the pituitary and causes levels of FSH and LH to rise, and then they're going to go to the gonads and cause either testosterone or estrogen production. So let's look at what this does. First off, in males, testosterone is released, and it stimulates the development of hair on the face, chest, axillary, and genital areas. It accelerates bone growth, and at the end of puberty causes closure of the epiphyseal plates. It stimulates the growth of skeletal muscle fibers. It activates central nervous system centers concerned with sex drive and sexual behaviors. It stimulates erythropoiesis, increasing blood volume and hematocrit. It's going to cause a thickening of the vocal cords and deepening of the voice. And in the reproductive system, it stimulates development of the accessory reproductive glands and helps promote spermatogenesis. In females, estrogen is released. This is going to stimulate hair growth in the axillary and genital areas and the initial development of the mammary glands. It's going to accelerate bone growth and cause closure of epiphyseal plates at the end of puberty. It stimulates the growth of skeletal muscle fibers, but not as much as testosterone. It activates central nervous system centers concerned with sex drive and sexual behaviors. It's going to decrease plasma cholesterol levels and slow the formation of plaque in arteries. We need the women to be around longer so they can take care of the babies, I guess. Also, this estrogen in the reproductive system, it's going to cause functional maturation of the uterus and the development of the accessory reproductive structures.